I was asleep, or at least I was supposed to be. My husband, David, had kissed me goodnight, said he was going to make a call downstairs, and I'd closed my eyes. But something, I don't know what, made me stay awake. And then I heard David's voice from the living room. The tone was different, raw, real in a way I'd never heard before. And I listened. What I heard that night changed how I saw my marriage. Not destroyed it, changed it. This is my story. My name is Jasmine. I've been married to David for 7 years. When people ask me about our relationship, I always say the same thing. We're solid. We communicate. We're partners. We met in graduate school. David was doing his MBA. I was working on my master's in education. He was the guy who always had something smart to say in class. I was the girl who actually listened. For the first 5 years, everything felt perfect. We built a life together. We bought a house. We had plans, real plans, a future that felt certain. But somewhere around year 6, I started to notice something. David would go quiet. David would go into another room to take calls. David wasn't quite present. Even when David was physically there, David seemed somewhere else. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself every marriage has moments like this. It was a Thursday night. Nothing special. Nothing that said your life is about to shift. David said he needed to call his friend Marcus. Marcus and David had known each other since college. They talked every few months. It seemed normal. David kissed my forehead and went downstairs. I closed my eyes. But I couldn't fall asleep. That's what I remember most. I just couldn't sleep. My mind was racing about something stupid, something work-related. I was frustrated, restless. I was lying there in the dark, thinking about how many times recently I'd felt this way, how many nights I'd been awake in my own marriage, wondering what David was thinking about, wondering what David was keeping from me. I don't know if I made a conscious decision to listen, or if curiosity just pulled me out of bed, but I got up. I went to the bedroom door, and I heard David talking downstairs. From the top of the stairs, I heard David say, "Marcus, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. I don't know if I'm being the husband Jasmine deserves." I stopped moving. I stopped breathing. David's voice was breaking. David sounded vulnerable in a way I hadn't heard in months, maybe years. David said, "Every day I wake up and I'm afraid. I'm afraid she's going to realize I'm not the man she thought I was. I'm afraid I'm not enough. I'm afraid she's going to wake up one day and wonder why she married me." I was gripping the banister. My heart was racing. This wasn't what I expected to hear. I expected to hear something infidelity related, something betrayal related, something obvious and ugly. But this was something different. This was David terrified that he wasn't good enough, David doubting himself, David carrying something heavy that he'd never told me. David said, "I've been pulling away because I thought it was better. I thought if I wasn't fully present, it would hurt less when she finally realized I'm not enough." Marcus must have said something, because David said, "I love her more than anything, Marcus. That's why this is so painful. I love Jasmine, and I'm certain I'm disappointing her every single day." I went to the bathroom and I locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and I tried to process what I'd just heard. My husband, the man I thought was distant and cold, wasn't being distant because he didn't love me. David was being distant because David was scared. All those moments when David wasn't present, David was pulling back because David thought he was protecting me from disappointment. All those canceled plans and quiet nights, David was choosing distance because David believed proximity would only hurt more. I realized I had spent months being frustrated with David for something David never knew I noticed. I'd built a narrative about David that had nothing to do with David's actual reality. David wasn't being cold. David was being afraid. And I had been so wrapped up in my own feelings of rejection that I hadn't asked David what was really going on. I remember sitting there in that bathroom and feeling something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. The kind of understanding that changes how you see someone. Standing in that bathroom, I started to understand my husband in a completely different way. David hadn't been rejecting me. David had been protecting me from what David thought was a disappointing truth. David had been carrying insecurity about his career. David had been doubting his ability to provide. David had been questioning whether he was good enough intellectually, professionally, romantically. And instead of talking to me, his wife, his partner, David had internalized all of it. David had decided that withdrawing was the best solution, that distance was the most honest thing David could offer. I realized that my husband, the man I'd been frustrated with, was actually suffering in silence. And I had been so focused on how his behavior affected me that I never stopped to ask David what was actually happening inside. That's the moment I understood. I hadn't been married to a man who didn't care. I'd been married to a man who cared so much that he was terrified of not being enough. The question wasn't why David was distant. The question was, how did my husband get so deep into his own head that he thought I needed him to be perfect? I came downstairs. David was still on the couch, phone in his lap, looking defeated. David looked up at me, and I could see the shift in his face. David knew. David could see in my expression that I had heard him. I could have confronted David with anger. I could have said, "Why didn't you tell me? Why have you been shutting me out?" I could have made it about my pain and my feelings. But I didn't, because I finally understood that this wasn't about me at all. I sat down next to David. I didn't touch him. I just sat there. "David," I said quietly, "I heard what you said to Marcus." David's face went pale. David stood up. David started to apologize. "No," I said. "Sit down. Just listen." David sat back down slowly, confused and terrified. "I heard that you think you're not enough. I heard that you've been pulling away because you're scared. I heard that you believe I'm going to leave you." David tried to speak, but I held up my hand. "What I want to know is, why didn't you tell me? Why have you chosen to carry that alone instead of letting me be part of your life?" David cried, not dramatically, just tears streaming down his face while he sat there looking at me. David said, "I didn't think you'd want to know. I thought telling you would just prove I wasn't good enough." "Good enough for what?" I asked. "For you, for us, for the life we built." I remember feeling such deep compassion in that moment. My husband, the strong one, the confident one, was crumbling because he'd been carrying a belief that he wasn't worthy of my love. "David," I said, "I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to be honest. I need you to let me in." And then David started talking, really talking. For the first time in over a year, my husband opened up. David told me about his insecurity about money, about his fear that he wasn't advancing in his career fast enough, about his anxiety that I secretly resented him, about the belief David had held since childhood that love meant you had to prove your worth constantly. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't fix. I just listened and let my husband know that I heard him. By the end of that conversation, we were both crying. We were both exhausted. We were both different. That night changed something fundamental in our marriage. It wasn't a magic fix. We didn't suddenly have a perfect relationship, but we changed the foundation. David started going to therapy, not relationship therapy at first. David started individual therapy to work through the beliefs he'd been carrying about his self-worth. I stopped assuming I knew what David was thinking and started asking. When David went quiet, instead of getting frustrated, I'd say, "What's going on in your head?" And David started answering. David started being vulnerable instead of withdrawn. We had real conversations about his insecurity, about my frustration, about how we could build something more honest. I realized that for years I'd been waiting for David to prove he was good enough, but David had been waiting for me to prove I loved him unconditionally. We were both waiting. We were both scared. We just didn't know how to tell each other. That night, when I overheard David's phone call, I could have used it as ammunition. I could have thrown it back at him, made him feel worse about himself. Instead, I chose to use it as a bridge. I chose to use his vulnerability as an opportunity to actually know my husband instead of just living alongside him. 6 months after that night, David got a promotion at work. But more than that, David started believing he deserved it. A year later, we took a trip, just the two of us. We talked for hours, not about problems, just about our dreams, our fears, our hopes, the conversations we should have been having all along. David told me that night when I overheard his call, he'd felt like he was drowning, and that he thought the only solution was to drown alone so I wouldn't go down with him. I told David that I didn't need him to be perfect, I needed him to be real. And slowly, David became real. Not the performative version of David that was trying to prove something, but the actual, vulnerable, imperfect, beautiful man I'd married. We're not suddenly perfect. We still have hard moments. We still have to choose honesty even when it's uncomfortable. But now we choose it together. That night when I couldn't sleep, when I overheard David's deepest fears, when I had the choice to use that information to hurt him or help him, I chose help. And in choosing to understand my husband instead of judge him, I didn't just save my marriage, I actually got to know it. People always ask me, aren't you upset that your husband wasn't telling you what he was thinking? Don't you feel like he lied to you? I understand that question, but I've realized something. Silence isn't always a lie. Sometimes silence is just fear. And sometimes listening to that fear instead of punishing it is the most powerful thing you can do. That night changed me as much as it changed David. I learned that I can't know what's happening in someone's heart unless they tell me, and they won't tell me if they're afraid I'll judge them for it. I learned that the strongest marriages aren't built on people being perfect. They're built on people being brave enough to be imperfect together. I learned that sometimes the most transformative moment in a relationship isn't a blow-up or a confrontation. It's a moment of quiet listening, a moment where you choose to hear your partner instead of just waiting for your turn to speak. My husband thought I was asleep that night. He had no idea I was listening. He had no idea that his honesty, even in my absence, would be the thing that brought us closer. Because the truth he spoke in that phone call was a gift. It was him finally letting me know who he really was. And when I got the chance to respond with love instead of judgment, everything changed. The phone call I overheard didn't destroy my marriage, it revealed my marriage. And in that revelation, we found something real. My name is Jasmine, and this is the story of how listening changed everything.